Hello and welcome to the Giving Voice to Depression podcast, brought to you by Recovery.com, the best place to find mental health and addiction treatment for anyone, anywhere.
Each week, we profile a guest who shares openly about their mental health journey. They share because they understand that when people don't talk about their depression or other mental health conditions, those of us who do struggle with them can feel like we're the only ones, that there's something wrong with us and that no one understands. We understand.
I'm Terry McGuire, the creator and co-host of this podcast. You have my promise that we'll keep it real here. Depression is real, and we're not going to sugarcoat our discussions about it.
Hope is also real, and you'll get a dose of that here too. I'm Carly McCullough, a licensed social worker and educator, and Terry's daughter. We've both experienced depression and also support loved ones struggling with it. We're here to normalize talking about depression and mental health in our communities, as well as our families.
And to share real-world tested strategies that have worked for other people who have walked similar paths. Thanks for joining us.
One of our favorite philosophers, Fred, or Mr. Rogers, said, quote, "Anything that's human is mentionable, and anything that is mentionable can be more manageable. When we talk about our feelings, they become less overwhelming, less upsetting, and less scary. The people we trust with that important talk can help us know that we're not alone."
Today's guest, Trina Kennedy, describes those conversations as completing a distress loop. Something with weight happens in our lives. With validation and support, we can process, and at least to some degree, release it. Without that opportunity, we often end up carrying and being affected by it long term.
We wanted to talk with Trina for a lot of reasons, but if we're honest, it was one phrase she used that really hooked us. In both describing her life and writing about the journey, from trauma to triumph and what lies between, she talks about the messy middle. And that's a piece, sometimes the biggest piece, that's often overlooked or avoided when we talk about anything from caterpillars and butterflies to life. So here now is Trina Kennedy giving her voice to depression.
The use and meaning of the word trauma have significantly shifted in recent years. Once reserved for describing experiences like war, abuse, and violence, it's made its way into everyday use. Some see this as diluting its meaning. Others argue a broader definition validates a wider range of human suffering.
Yes, it's becoming overused and watered down, but we also have to be respectful and mindful that it isn't us who gets to decide what's traumatic for someone because we weren't in their experience, right? So I think it's an important distinction. I think what I'm hearing is often people will use trauma to describe distressing or stressful situations, not necessarily traumatic. And so I think it's an important maybe piece of the conversation to help people maybe understand what is the difference between a true trauma response versus more a stress response. Because physiologically, it's actually very similar. Both can create that adrenaline and cortisol, which increase heart rate and kind of can create that panicky feeling.
It reminds me of a story I heard once about a big brother who regularly disguised himself to scare his younger siblings. To him, it may have seemed like harmless fun, boys being boys. But for at least one of his brothers, who truly believed that his life was at risk and that this stranger would kill him given the chance, it was a traumatic experience.
I'm not sure if you're familiar with Dr. Gabor Maté's work. Yes. So he says trauma is what happens inside of us because of what happens to us. So we have to also really be careful that there's no measuring stick. We can't go up and go, oh, this is trauma. That's not trauma, right?
Right. And with that understanding, we pivot to Trina's own mental health journey and the role trauma and depression have played in it.
All right. So it started for me in childhood. I came from a typical upper middle class, 2-parent, home by all accounts, looked typical and normal and happy. I think even a lot of people may have looked at my life and said, Trina has it so good, because unfortunately, I think people measure success or happiness by the things people have. And certainly I had those things.
But what looks good from the outside can feel very different on the inside.
My parents did the best they could with the tools that they had, but they couldn't give me what they never received. And so I experienced relational trauma, particularly with my dad. I think he believed in his mind, to love your family, you go to work and you put a roof over their head and and he did that. He did that in spades. However, children need emotional love and connection, and I didn't receive that. I was a very sensitive child. I felt things very deeply. I still do. And in moments of distress, when a child's distress system is activated, children need a safe space where they feel validated and heard. And I didn't get that. When I was distressed, I would get, quit your crying, or I'm going to give you something to cry about.
I had that phrase.
So I very quickly armored up, because that's what you do to survive. And that armor became suppressing what I was feeling, suppressing who I thought I was or who I needed to be in terms of expressing that emotion. It didn't feel safe to be honest about what I was feeling. And that's problematic.
Trina uses the analogy of heavy rocks to describe the big distressing feelings that come our way.
And we need to give space for that rock. We have to name that feeling. We have to feel it, and then we have to share it. So name it to tame it, feel it to heal it, and share it to bear it. And when we can do that, we can put that heavy rock down and move forward. And when we don't do that, we have to carry that rock with us, and we put it in our backpack. And that backpack doesn't come off.
Trina says some of the rocks she has carried in and since childhood wouldn't have had that weight if she'd had a safe space to name, feel, and share them. In that environment, she says, she could have moved through her emotions and put them down.
So, for example, I was probably 8 or 9, and I went next door to my girlfriend, my friend Carrie's house, and she was on the bed just sobbing. And I'm like, Carrie, what's wrong? And she just explained to me her parents were getting a divorce. And this was like the early 80s. I didn't even know anybody whose parents were divorced. So, I sat with her for a few hours, and then I had to go home. And I remember still crying in my bedroom. So my distress system was activated. Mm-hmm. And my dad walked by and said, what are you crying about? In his gruff voice. And I'm like, well, Carrie's parents are getting a divorce, and I'm really sad for her. And I don't know how to help her. Now, had my dad known what to do, and he didn't, because this wasn't shown to him, had he come in and had he sat with me and hugged me and said, you know what, you're such a good friend to feel that way for Carrie. It's really hard to watch people we care about in pain. I think you're being a good friend just by being there with her. What do you need? What can I do for you? I would have been able to put that rock down, right? That rock wouldn't have got put into my backpack.
Mm-hmm. A child's backpack is small, and Trina's filled.
There's just a series of events, like there is in every childhood. Those things didn't have to be traumatic had my parents known how to complete that distress loop for me. But they didn't. So it was like death by 1,000 little cuts, mm-hmm. right? And, probably by 14, high anxiety and high depression. And it was about 2 years before I turned 16 where I started to have suicidal thoughts, because that backpack was heavy. My back hurt. My heart hurt. Mm-hmm. I didn't have the skills. I didn't feel I had the relationships of where to go and just start to kind of unpack that backpack and figure out all those things that needed to be sorted through. And that's the problem. That's the thing when we don't have those safe spaces or those safe relationships who can hold safe space for us to feel those emotions and name them and experience them and then kind of walk through them. They're done. Then they build and they fester, and it impacts mental health.
At 16, Trina was hospitalized after a suicide attempt.
When you're in that place of depression and anxiety, you have distorted cognition. The way you see the world is not really the way it is. Like I believed nobody cared. I believed I couldn't do anything right. I believed to my core the world would be better off without me and that I didn't deserve to live. Like I believed those to my core. But when I saw my mom and I saw my little sisters, right, I could see how I had hurt them. So that was just adding. It was just adding, again, more rocks. I'm carrying all these rocks and no room to even put them in my backpack anymore. So, I mean, I was more suicidal for a good 4 or 5 months following getting out of that hospital.
What changed at that point that made you less?
You know, thank God my mom recognized. She didn't know how to help me. My dad didn't know how to help me. And my dad was really in his own kind of a loop of pain that I wasn't even aware of. He was, I think, doing a lot of self-blame for what had happened to me. And so my mom thankfully connected me with the most incredible psychologist. I still remember her name, Joan Bailey. I've tried to find her through social media and all that, but I haven't been able to. She changed my life. She was the first person that made me feel seen, heard, understood, and empowered.
Wow.
She didn't judge me. She didn't try to fix me. She just held safe space for the first time where I could start to pull those rocks out, feel them, name them, share them, and put them down. And let me tell you, it transformed my life. I know without her and my best friend, Jen, who was my lifeline through school as I was kind of going through that process, I wouldn't be here.
I'm sorry you had that experience. I'm glad you found someone who could support you and that your mother had the insight to know that just because she didn't know what to do doesn't mean nothing should be done. So that's a really important message for anybody listening, because most of us weren't raised with those skills or those tools. So to say, you know what, I'm in over my head. I need to find someone else who does have these skills, and then I will try to learn. So yeah, I'm glad that happened for you.
I'm 52 this year and I'm still on my healing journey. So, and between today and that day that I met Joan, it's been messy. Mm-hmm. It's been a messy transition, but also beautiful in so many ways.
So we have no ability, unfortunately, to erase our past, but you've talked about integrating those experiences, sort of telling a new story. How does that process happen and how does it help?
Well, so people can have resilience. So resilience is our ability to bounce back after adversity, which can happen a lot after people heal their trauma. But then there's also the next kind of level of that, which is called post-trauma growth. That's, I think, it's the ability to kind of reflect and go, this was my learning. This was my growth in those experiences. I'm actually a better person for those. It set me, that life and connecting with Joan set me on a trajectory to become a social worker and create safe spaces for other people in their crises, as a way to hopefully hope that they, at least within the moment that we're together, that they can put at least one rock down. Mm-hmm. In this moment that we're interacting, I can hold this safe space for them. I can make them feel seen, heard, and understood. I can do that, and I do that very well. So it led me on the path to trauma. It led me to the path of writing a book and hopefully helping people in their healing. Like, so much came from those experiences, as hard as they were. I know I'm a better person for it, and I'm helping other people because of it. So that's, that post-trauma growth is, I think, incredible. Not everybody who goes through trauma will move into post-trauma growth, because it really is an individual experience, and there's a lot of kind of healing aspects that need to be included in that.
When you talk about trauma and getting to a better place, what do you know is helpful for people to hear that maybe we haven't said yet?
You matter. Your life matters. People care. Right? And I know it doesn't feel that way. That's the cognitive distortion when people are in that pit of depression. And there are people who want to help, but people need to know, I guess, that you need that help. So please, please, please reach out. Take that risk, reach out. Again, if it's a professional, they will be able to hold that safe space. I think sometimes it feels riskier with people who aren't professionals. But again, I don't know. I don't want to assume. I think all of our experiences are so different. But healing is possible. Healing is possible, but it's not possible alone. We have to heal in connection to something bigger than ourselves, something outside of ourselves. So figuring that out and bringing that into your life, I think will be a big part in starting that healing or continuing the healing.
Wow. There are so many things that I want to talk about that Trina just shared. I want to start with one of the things that she mentioned right at the beginning, which was how our culture and our society is starting to talk about trauma much more than we used to.
Yes.
And she quotes Dr. Gabor Maté, who is one of my favorite writers about this. And he released a new book recently called The Myth of Normal.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that he talks about is he describes normal the way scientists describe normal. And so normal are the set of conditions in which health is possible. And so that what he's shared is that in a society like ours, where it's actually really, really stressful just to live, for some folks, it is such a struggle to make ends meet and to feel hopeful about the future. And there's even some studies coming out around some of the high depression that we're seeing in adolescence and Gen Z, and they're calling it environmental related depression, which is that they aren't sure that the environment is going to last for their full.
It's not normal and they don't feel safe.
It's not normal and they don't feel safe. And so one of the things that he does such a brilliant job of is he says that we, those of us who experience mental health situations or those feelings, we sometimes think that we are not the normal ones, that the lack of normal is us, that we're not fitting in. And what he's saying is your body is responding to a set of conditions that are depressing. So
or traumatic.
Yeah. So does it make sense for us to continue to locate the trauma and the mental health as sort of individual deficiencies or even like hereditary, right? Family conditions? Or would it be better to put a label on some of the things that aren't normal or typical in the way that he's describing it that are making us sick?
Mm-hmm. A normal response to a really abnormal situation.
Absolutely. Trina uses that beautiful metaphor of backpacks, and the backpacks only have certain amount of space in them for rocks. And especially if you're a little kid, right? Those little kid backpacks are so tiny. And one of the things that struck me about Trina's story is that she starts to describe how things started to feel a little different around ages 8 and 9. And one thing that I've seen working in schools a lot is that often hormones really influence the onset of depression and other symptoms, right? That's something that you've talked about in other episodes in terms of postpartum, in terms of menopause, that when there are these huge hormonal shifts in the body, of course that impacts how we're experiencing things. So in terms of puberty, they're able to feel the full extent of the emotional spectrum. So we think of that as the gas pedal. They've got full access to the gas pedal, but what hasn't come online yet is the brake. And so it makes a heartbreak feel and seem to their brains as impossible to live through, for example, in a way that when we're adults, we have more of the part of our brain developed after puberty that thinks a little bit more long-term, that can think through some of those consequences, and also that we have stronger coping strategies. And so when certain traumas or stressors happen in childhood and in puberty, that pain, that weight of that rock that Trina's talking about is so heavy.
Yeah.
And they really need adult support in order to put those rocks down, because that's the part of their brain that they don't have access to yet. So they sort of need to borrow ours. And sometimes you're lucky enough to have a mature friend or something, but it really, our children's brains are structured to look for adults for that support and putting those rocks down.
And it's so easy as the adult and as the parent to be like, yep, this is just part of life, is actually so dismissive of the experience the person's actually having. And when it's your kid, you want them to feel better, but also the way to do that is by acknowledging what in fact they are feeling.
Yeah. And I think the same thing is true for other adults who are trying to support children, right?
Mhm.
So parents, I think, get a lot of the attention and for good reason, but cousins, aunts, uncles, teachers, coaches, religious figures, right?
School counselors. Yeah.
School counselors, absolutely. The practice of validating that feeling is real and that's really heavy for them.
Right.
I think adults feel silly or stupid saying them sometimes.
Huh.
They don't feel profound enough. I don't know. I think we expect wisdom or support to sound more complicated than, I am sorry, that sucks.
Yeah.
Wow.
Ouch.
Ouch. Or just silence.
How much silence?
And then there's too much creepy silence. So one of the things that Trina mentions is that her mom didn't know how to help her. And I guess I'm wondering if it would be helpful for us to share from it. Like, what did it feel like for you as a mom when you feel like the situation is, great, whatever, but like you didn't have the equipment you needed to support us as kids?
Interesting question. We're going to do this, huh? I will say sort of twofold. There was one, like, where you feel a little inadequate, right? Because you want to have everything your child needs and you just don't. And the other was I'm grateful for recognizing my deficiencies. It's like, well, I can't do this. Or you might not want to tell me because I'm here and I'm mom.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one of the reasons why when you were young, I brought in therapists, because I didn't think you guys were messed up. I thought it would be very helpful to have someone other than me for you to be able to tell anything you wanted to, and that they had more experience dealing with those things. You were my first child and, hadn't done it before. So I think that I was grateful to have that option to say, I'm going to connect you with your school counselor. And then eventually, let's go talk to, remember, it was a feeling doctor. I said,
doctor.
Yeah, something's wrong with your teeth. I'll bring you to a tooth doctor. Something's wrong with your feet. I'll bring you to a foot doctor. And if something's up with your feelings, I'm going to bring you to a feeling doctor. And we really normalized it, I think. Yeah.
From the kid perspective, something that I've seen play out mostly in schools is I think adults think they do a better job faking it than they often do, which is kids can really sense when the adult is like, oh, I'm out of my depths.
Mm-hmm.
Yet it is very rare for an adult to say, you know what, honey, I'm out of my depths.
Mm-hmm.
And to refer out like you're describing doing. It's a really rare occurrence. I think it requires humility. I think it requires self-awareness. I think it requires a lack of ego in order to do that. And you were able to do that. And I think that from a kid's experience, something I see play out all the time is kids witnessing adults who don't have the skills necessary for a moment and won't admit it. And that ends up being really wild on the inside of a kid's brain, because you go, I need help. You don't know how to give it to me. And you're not going to admit that you don't know how.
Yeah.
I can see you don't know how. Every time I say this, you tell me to get over it. Every time I say this, you say, when I was your age, I can tell you don't know what to do with my feelings. Your behavior's already shown me that. And so the powerful move being, the strong move being, the healthy adult move being to be like, honey, I don't know. Let's figure it out.
Let's find someone who does.
Let's find someone who does.
And in my mind, the more supportive, caring adults you had in your life, the better it was going to be. And the more prepared you were going to be for adulthood. So it was, let's get the school guidance counselor, let's get your grandparents, let's get, anybody involved who is going to be caring and loving and healthy in their interactions with you. I wanted on board. It was like, Team Carly, let's do this.
And In terms of childhood trauma, they say that it's 2 or more consistent caring adults that are actually able to buffer the impact of childhood trauma. So the potentially traumatic events that might happen in childhood might not be experienced by the child as traumatic if they have 2 or more adults who they can talk to about, who they can put down their rocks with, who can help them know that they're not alone. Because one of the huge things about trauma is you feel overwhelmed, which stinks, but you also feel powerless. And it's really through connection and relationship that we start to not feel powerless again.
And you had another talking point?
Another thing that I want to mention is that in Trina's experience, so she talks about how the weight and the rocks were accumulating, and that for her, it led to depression and then to some suicidal ideation. I also just want to name that that's one of many ways that trauma and overwhelm and despair can manifest, especially in children. And there's this musical artist I really enjoy called Karuk, and they have this song called Pepto-Bismol. And in the song, it's about how as a kid, they had so many rocks, overwhelming feelings, and their mom didn't know what to do with it either. But for Karuk, it manifested as gastrointestinal. And a lot of kids complain about headaches sometimes, but headaches and stomach aches are the 2 really big ones that we see in childhood. And we call it somatization, which is basically that brain thoughts that hurt, they turn into body hurts.
Mind-body connection. It's well
Absolutely.
documented.
They're not different. And so this whole song, Pepto-Bismol, is about how Karuk's mom didn't know how to speak with them about what they were feeling, but did know how to give Pepto-Bismol to treat the stomach symptoms. And it's a really beautiful ode to parents trying. And recognizing that something's happening here that I don't fully understand, and trying, and that attempt matters. Kids are checking for that attempt. Are you even trying to help me? And for Karuk, their mom didn't nail it, but it was an attempt towards supporting the feelings and the body stuff.
Nice. So I want to restate the name of Trina's book in case somebody wants to learn more. From Trauma to Triumph and What Lies Between. And her website is Trina, Trina, Lee, Kennedy.ca. So thank you, Trina, for sharing some of the many lessons you've learned and that great rock and backpack analogy. And thank you, Carly, for your first official episode as co-host. Welcome.
Thank you so much. We really hope that this discussion helps give some language or context to your own depression, or ideas for how to support someone else in your life living with it. We invite you to check out the hundreds of episodes in our archive and to explore both the Resource Hub and treatment options on recovery.com. Depression is too dark a road to walk alone.
We'll be back next week.